Our devotional thought or focus today really is about rest. I hope that you are learning to rest in the Lord. Boy, I know that's something I've got to continue to focus on and pay attention to, because I can really, in my flesh, try to accomplish things on my own. I think that in our text this week in Luke chapter 6, the first 11 verses, it was interesting that the issue of rest was almost hijacked. The idea of ceasing from labor as a way to trust God was taken on this crazy excursion by the Pharisees that totally sabotaged its original purpose. So it's no wonder that there's a collision throughout the Gospel of Luke over the issue of Sabbath and rule keeping. The Pharisees were so perfectionistic about their rule keeping that literally they were having everyone under the microscope, the magnifying glass of, are you doing what we said you've got to do? And whenever that spirit is on us, we don't rest. We don't take deep breaths. We don't calm our spirit. We become more anxious, more fearful. More mind reading. What are people thinking of me and what are they saying about me? Well, if you lived around the Pharisees, I bet you probably asked those questions often as they looked down their nose at whatever you were doing. In the Gospel of Luke, we see not just one, but 7 different times where the Sabbath is the issue that the Pharisees take up with Jesus. The first was when Jesus went to his hometown in Nazareth, and on the Sabbath, he gave his first message. And at first, it looked like everybody was going to accept it and thought it was wonderful. And then all of a sudden, when he began to talk about the fact that God wanted to reach Gentile dogs, that's what they would have considered a Gentile. All of a sudden, they got their feathers ruffled, and they're wanting to take Jesus to a cliff and throw him off. And then Jesus progresses and goes from another Sabbath controversy to another, to another, to another. 7 times we'll see it happen. And I think something interesting about the Sabbath, what is the Sabbath all about? In Genesis, the first part of Genesis, God declared the Sabbath as a day of rest, a day to cease from labor. And whenever we rest in the Lord, when we take Sabbath rest, we're saying, God, we need to replenish ourselves. So I'm hoping that these devotions kind of inspire you to stop and take a deep breath. Breathe in. Breathe out. Let the breath of God let you find a rhythm that says, God, there are so many things I could do. Work is oftentimes an obsession of what we can do, but I need to rest. The events that took place after Christ's resurrection were powerful. We looked at that. Easter was just a couple weeks ago. But you think about what happened in the resurrection. Jesus was crucified on Friday. He's in the grave for 3 days. He raises on the first day of the week, Sunday. And from that point on, disciples began to worship, no longer on the Sabbath. That was the old, right? But the new plan has them now worshiping on Resurrection Day. And it became known as the Lord's Day. But the Lord's Day is not Sabbath. The Sabbath was the 7th day. Something I read by Warren Wiersbe, a wonderful Bible teacher who passed away some time ago, said, if you think about those two things and the shift of the early church to begin to worship on the Lord's Day, it says something about rest and what God wants to do in our lives. The Sabbath was resting after work and was a part of the old creation and represented the law. The Lord's Day is resting before work and is a part of the new creation and represents God's grace. You see, when we rest, we don't rest because we have to work for our salvation, or we have to work for God's approval. We rest knowing that we have His approval, that we have salvation. So when we rise from our rest, the work we do is not to gain God's favor, but to celebrate God's favor and to give it away. Today, I want to encourage you to rest. Rest in the grace of God. Rest knowing that Jesus did all the work, so you and I can rest in the palm of His hand, in the grip of His grace, in the magnitude of His mercy, so we can rise and contribute to the work He still wants to do. Have a wonderful, beautiful day. I'll see you tomorrow.